Accuses the making of a false statement in matters within the jurisdiction of the Dunwoody Police Department in violation of Official Code of Georgia 16-1020 for the said accused person in the county of DeKalb, state of Georgia, on or about the 5th day of January 2011, did knowingly and willfully make a false statement in a matter within the jurisdiction of the Dunwoody Police Department, to wit, accused told Lieutenant D. Barnes and Deputy Chief D. Sides that she never suspected that Hemi Newman was involved in the murder of Russell Sneiderman prior to December 28, 2010. Count 4 charges and accuses Andrea Sneiderman with the offense of perjury in violation of Official Code of Georgia 16-1070 for the said accused person in the county of DeKalb, state of Georgia, on or about the 21st day of February 2012, having been given a lawful oath in a judicial proceeding, State versus Hemi Newman, 11 CR 1364, did make a false statement in a judicial proceeding material to a point in question, to wit, that she did not have knowledge that Russell Sneiderman had been shot at the time she spoke to Donald Sneiderman prior to her arrival at Dunwoody Prep. Such statement being material to the issue surrounding the murder of Russell Sneiderman. Count 5 charges and accuses Andrea Sneiderman with the offense of making a false statement in matters within the jurisdiction of the Dunwoody Police Department in violation of Official Code of Georgia 16-1020 for the said accused person in the county of DeKalb, state of Georgia, on or about the 5th day of January 2011, did knowingly and willfully make a false statement in a matter within the jurisdiction of the Dunwoody Police Department, to wit, accused told Lieutenant D. Barnes and Deputy Chief D. Sides that she did not know what had happened to Russell Sneiderman at the time she had arrived at Dunwoody Prep, when in fact she knew that Russell Sneiderman had been shot prior to her arrival at Dunwoody Prep. Count 6 charges and accuses Andrea Sneiderman with the offense of perjury in violation of Official Code of Georgia 16-1070 for the said accused person in the county of DeKalb, state of Georgia, on or about the 21st day of February 2012, having been given a lawful oath in a judicial proceeding, State versus Hemi Newman, 11 CR 1364, did make a false statement in a judicial proceeding material to a point in question, to wit, that she was not romantically involved with Hemi Newman, such statement being material to the issues surrounding the murder of Russell Sneiderman. Count 7 charges and accuses Andrea Sneiderman with the offense of perjury in violation of Official Code of Georgia 16-1070 for the said accused person in the county of DeKalb, state of Georgia, on or about the 21st day of February 2012, having been given a lawful oath in a judicial proceeding, State versus Hemi Newman, 11 CR 1364, did make a false statement in a judicial proceeding material to a point in question, to wit, that none of Hemi Newman's feelings for her were ever returned, such statement being material to the issue surrounding murder of Russell Sneiderman. Count 8 charges and accuses Andrea Sneiderman with the offense of false statements in matters within the jurisdiction of the Dunwoody Police Department in violation of Official Code of Georgia 16-1020 for the said accused person in the county of DeKalb, state of Georgia, on or about the 19th day of November 2010, did knowingly and willfully make a false statement during an official investigation into the murder of Russell Sneiderman, to which she told Detective A. Thompson that she had made it clear to Hemi Newman that she did not want him to pursue her romantically. Count 9 charges and accuses Andrea Sneiderman with the offense of perjury in violation of Official Code of Georgia 16-1070 for the said accused person in the county of DeKalb, state of Georgia, on or about the 21st day of February 2012, having been given a lawful oath in a judicial proceeding, State versus Hemi Newman, 11 CR 1364, did make a false statement in a judicial proceeding material to a point in question, to wit, that she did not share a hotel room with Hemi Newman in Longmont, Colorado, such statement being material to the issue surrounding the murder of Russell Sneiderman. Count 10 charges and accuses Andrea Sneiderman with the offense of false statement in matters within the jurisdiction of the Dunwoody Police Department in violation of Official Code of Georgia 16-1020 for the said accused person in the county of DeKalb, state of Georgia, on or about the 5th day of January 2011, did knowingly and willfully make a false statement to Lieutenant D. Barnes and Deputy Chief D. Sides, to wit, she denied that Hemi Newman was in Longmont, Colorado in July 2010 with accused. Count 11 charges and accuses Andrea Sneiderman with the offense of perjury in violation of Official Code of Georgia 16-1070 for the said accused person in the county of DeKalb, state of Georgia, on or about the 21st day of February 2012, having been given an oath in a judicial proceeding, State versus Hemi Newman, 11 CR 1364, did make a false statement in a judicial proceeding material to a point in question, to wit, that at the time she was in Longmont, Colorado with Hemi Newman, she believed he was there on business for General Electric, such statement being material to the issue surrounding the murder of Russell Sneiderman. Count 12, charges and accuses Andrea Sneiderman with the offense of perjury in violation of Official Code of Georgia 161070 for the said accused person in the county of DeKalb, state of Georgia, on or about the 21st day of February 2012, having been given an oath in a judicial proceeding, State versus Hemi Newman, 11 CR 1364, did make a false statement in a judicial proceeding to a point in question, to wit, that she and Hemi Newman did not kiss while in Greenville, South Carolina, such statement being material to the issue surrounding the murder of Russell Sneiderman. Count 13 charges and accuses Andrea Sneiderman with the offense of perjury in violation of Official Code of Georgia 161070 for the said accused person in the county of DeKalb, state of Georgia, on or about the 21st day of February 2012, having been given a lawful oath in a judicial proceeding, State versus Hemi Newman, 11 CR 1364, did make a false statement in a judicial proceeding material to a point in question, to where the accused testified it was due to her mother's, Bonnie Greenberg's, concern for the accused's safety that she did not immediately report for her suspicions of Hemi Newman's involvement in the murder of Russell Sneiderman to the Dunwoody Police Department, such statement being material to the issues surrounding the murder of Russell Sneiderman, contrary to the laws of the state, the good order, peace, dignity thereof, signed Robert James, the district attorney. To all of these charges, Andrea Sneiderman has entered a plea of not guilty. She is presumed innocent unless and until proven guilty in a court of law. Also, at the conclusion of the trial, you will have the indictment out with you along with the other evidence, also with a proposed verdict form, in which all of you must freely and voluntarily agree based upon the evidence that you have heard during the course of this trial. Ladies and gentlemen, we have done jury selection. The next portion of the trial will become what is called opening statements. Both the state and the defense will have an opportunity to outline to you what they anticipate the evidence to show. At the conclusion of the opening statement will come to what is called the presentation of evidence. At this point in time, the state will have the opportunity to go first because they have the burden of proving each and every material element beyond a reasonable doubt. Once they have done their opening statements, then the defense will have an opportunity to give its opening statement. And then we will have the presentation of evidence. All right? Mr. James, you may proceed. I'm sorry. Ms. Hill, you may proceed.
A forbidden romance that ends in murder. Silence, despite her suspicions. Lies to conceal the truth from her family, her friends, the police, and ladies and gentlemen, even to a jury. That is what the evidence in this case will show about the defendant in this case, Andrea Sneiderman, and her relationship with Hemi Newman, her boss, her lover, and the man that murdered her husband, Rusty Sneiderman. The evidence will show how their relationship ended in the murder of her husband. The evidence will show she suspected Hemi Newman immediately. And the evidence will show, ladies and gentlemen, that she lied. Throughout the investigation and throughout the trial of her husband's murderer. That is what the evidence will show. The evidence will show, ladies and gentlemen, that the defendant was married to Russell Sneiderman. He was affectionately known as Rusty. And they had a young girl, Sophia, and a young boy, Ian. In the year of 2010, they were entering their 10th year of marriage. And ladies and gentlemen, you'll hear in April of that year, she took a job with General Electric, GE, as a quality systems manager. This was the first time that she'd had a job in corporate America. In fact, the evidence will show, ladies and gentlemen, up until this point, she worked out of a home office as a consultant. So she was excited about this new phase of her life. She was starting a new job. And you'll hear evidence, ladies and gentlemen, that at that job, her boss or her supervisor at GE was a man by the name of Hemi Newman. Hemi Newman became her mentor almost immediately. And you'll hear that he gave her assignments and responsibilities that were rewarding to her. They were professionally fulfilling to her. And you'll also hear, ladies and gentlemen, that their mentorship and their work relationship quickly turned into a friendship. And during this friendship, you'll hear that they shared things about personal matters as well as work-related matters with one another. You'll hear, ladies and gentlemen, that she embraced the new challenges of her job. And the evidence will show that they began traveling together for work almost immediately. In fact, in May of 2010, just 1 month into her new job, they took their first trip together to Melbourne, Florida. And you will hear that this was the first of several trips they took throughout the course of that summer. Ladies and gentlemen, the evidence will show over that summer and during these trips, the friendship developed into a romantic relationship. And this relationship, it included romantic emails, poems, dinner, wine, dancing, kissing. That's what the evidence will show. And you'll also see, ladies and gentlemen, that throughout this relationship, she started to experience conflicting feelings. You see, at one minute, you'll see she was completely in with him. She'd be involved in this behavior with him, and then all of a sudden, she'd start to pull back. She'd stop and say, well, we can't do this. And in fact, ladies and gentlemen, you'll hear it in her own words through an email that she sent to Hemi, where she acknowledges that she's conflicted internally. She's having to struggle between anger and selfishness. She feels torn between her reality and her desires. And the evidence will show, ladies and gentlemen, that her reality was that she and Rusty were not at the happiest point of their marriage during this time. In fact, ladies and gentlemen, you'll hear that there was tension at home. And you'll hear that the defendant started to develop feelings of resentment. She started to resent the fact that she felt that for their 10 years of marriage, most of their time was focused on Rusty. Most of their time was spent making sure that Rusty was happy. She felt that she had stood by and made sure that Rusty could find professional fulfillment, which he was trying to do at that time. And you'll hear, ladies and gentlemen, that because of this resentment, she started to feel like she was entitled to some happiness too. And the evidence will show that she found that happiness. She found that happiness in her new job. She was now in corporate America. She found that happiness. She had a boss who admired her. He validated her. He complimented her. In fact, you'll hear, ladies and gentlemen, he told her she was beautiful. He professed his love for her at some point. He even asked her, ladies and gentlemen, to consider marrying him. That's what the evidence in this case will show. And you'll hear, ladies and gentlemen, that throughout this relationship, these feelings, the conflict, caused her to have inconsistent behavior. And you'll see the emails that reflect this. 7 months into this new job, 7 months into this relationship with Hemi Newman, her husband was shot to death. And he was shot to death after he had dropped their 2-year-old son Ian off at the Dunwoody Prep Daycare Center. You'll hear evidence, ladies and gentlemen, from witnesses to the shooting, and they'll tell you that the police were called. They gave the police information about what they witnessed. They gave a description of the shooter. They told the police that the shooter had on what appeared to be a fake beard. They also told the police that the shooter left the scene in a van, but the van didn't have a license plate. So, ladies and gentlemen, the police will tell you they had no idea who had shot Rusty Sneiderman. And they had no idea why someone would want him dead. But the evidence will show, ladies and gentlemen, other than the shooter, there was one other person who knew why the shooter wanted Rusty dead. And the evidence will show, ladies and gentlemen, that that person is sitting at this table. And despite the fact that she knew why someone would want Rusty dead, she concealed that information. She hid it from the police. She didn't tell the police about the relationship. In fact, ladies and gentlemen, you'll hear that the police, they had no leads. They didn't know where to start looking for why someone would shoot and kill Rusty Sneiderman. And the evidence will be that they went to her home the day after the shooting, on November 19th, and they interviewed her in her home. And they asked specific questions, and some of those questions, ladies and gentlemen, you'll hear were for the purpose of developing leads in the investigation, so that they would know where to start looking so they could apprehend the person who had shot and killed her husband. And they specifically asked her, well, is anyone interested in you? And her answer, ladies and gentlemen, was, well, my boss, Hemi Newman. So the police asked her about that. And she said, well, one time on a trip, he made a pass at me. But I didn't respond. I shut it down. That was it. And the police asked her, so you all were okay enough to kind of move beyond that and continue on with work? And she said yes. She lied. She didn't tell the police that it was more than a one-time thing. She didn't tell the police about the relationship. She didn't tell the police about the trips they took together and the fact that he expressed his love for her. She didn't tell the police that he told her he wanted to marry her and to make her and her children happy. She didn't tell the police, ladies and gentlemen, that she sent him close to 200 pictures of her children after he said he wanted to raise them. She didn't tell them, ladies and gentlemen, that the relationship had progressed to a point where she was torn. And she didn't tell them, ladies and gentlemen, that she was responsible for bringing Hemi Newman into their home and introducing Rusty to his murderer. So you see, although she mentioned his name, She concealed the truth. She hid it. She kept the police from being able to figure out who shot and killed her husband out in the care center. Not only did she hide the relationship, ladies and gentlemen, she hid the suspicions that she had. The suspicions of his guilt. The suspicions of his culpability in shooting her husband down in cold blood outside of their son's daycare center. She hid that from the police. Because if the police had known about the relationship, they would have known why someone wanted Rusty dead. And she concealed the fact that would have given them that information. She concealed the fact of the relationship. She concealed the fact that she suspected him immediately. She didn't tell the police that, but she told her girlfriends, and you'll hear that. She told her girlfriends that long before Hemi was ever arrested. You'll hear that she told her friends, when I look at that sketch that the police did, I see my boss's eyes. She didn't tell the police that. And ladies and gentlemen, the police will tell you that if they had not been misled, they would have been able to identify Rusty's killer long before 2 months when Hemi was finally arrested. They would have told you that the information she kept from them, that the lies she told them, hindered that investigation and kept them from being able to make an arrest in her husband's murder. You'll also hear, ladies and gentlemen, that when the police questioned her about her boss, she misled them. If they asked her another question about Hemi, what she'd say is, I think you're going the wrong way with this Hemi thing. It's nothing. He's not the kind of person that would do that. She misled the police. But at the same time, she told her girlfriends she thought it was Hemi. Police will tell you, ladies and gentlemen, if they knew about that relationship, they would have knocked on Hemi Newman's door that very day. But they didn't know about it because she hid it. Now, throughout the course of this trial, ladies and gentlemen, the state will bring you evidence. And that evidence will come in many forms. You may get documents, such as emails, telephone records, travel documents. There'll also be witnesses that are presented to you, and they'll take the stand and they'll testify and present evidence to you. And there may be times when we will call a witness that may appear to be taken out of chronological order. Just know that that's being done to accommodate a schedule. But we ask that you pay close attention to what that witness is telling you. And if you feel the need, take notes. You will also, ladies and gentlemen, see clips, video clips from a trial proceeding where you may see faces and other lawyers that are not with us here today. But those clips are also evidence for your consideration. And when you watch those clips, you can give them whatever weight you deem appropriate in your deliberations. So that's just some of the types of evidence that you all will be presented with throughout the course of this trial. And ladies and gentlemen, that evidence that will be presented through these witnesses and those documents, they will show you information about the relationship that the defendant had with Hemi Newman. And as I told you before, the evidence will show that they took a trip at least once a month for the entire time that she was employed with GE. You'll hear that during some of these trips, they specifically requested adjoining rooms. And when I say adjoining rooms, the evidence will show that these are the rooms that are next to one another. And inside the rooms, there's a door. And you can go back and forth in between the rooms without ever going into the hallway. You'll hear evidence of that. You'll also hear, ladies and gentlemen, evidence that in some of these locations, on some of these trips, they both were present in the location, but there was only one hotel reservation. The other information, ladies and gentlemen, you'll get will be emails. Emails that document some of the activity that went on during some of these trips. You'll see an email where Hemi talks about them waking up together in Denver. You'll see an email where he talks about her putting her head on his shoulder while they look at the stars. You'll see emails that chronicle the planning of some of these trips and some of these activities. You'll see emails where she references her feelings and the struggle that she's having. The struggle between anger and selfishness. The struggle between desire and reality. You'll see an email where she actually tells Hemi about the tension that's now in her home between her and Rusty when she returned from a trip with Hemi. You'll also, ladies and gentlemen, see emails where she expresses her anger to Hemi. And she blames him for this struggle she's having. You'll hear, ladies and gentlemen, that she was raised to not believe in divorce. And there's no evidence that she intended to divorce Rusty at this time. So those feelings that caused her to pull away will be evident in her behavior and in the emails. You'll see an on-again, off-again, back and forth kind of relationship. The problem is, ladies and gentlemen, she'd get over these feelings within weeks, sometimes within days, and she'd be engaged in the very same behavior, sending mixed messages. The evidence will show she wanted it both ways. Some of the witnesses you'll hear from, ladies and gentlemen, will be a lady by the name of Miss Shana Citron. And at the time, Miss Citron was the defendant's best friend. And Miss Citron will tell you that she remembers having a conversation with the defendant. She remembers the two of them talking, they had lunch, and the defendant was telling Miss Citron about her new job. She was telling her about the travel that she was doing. She mentioned her new boss. And Miss Citron will tell you that as the defendant was talking to her, she had an opportunity to see her and to see her facial expressions. And during this conversation, the defendant also told her friend about the struggles that she and Rusty were having. Miss Citron will tell you when she had that conversation with the defendant as a friend, she immediately started to be concerned about the marriage. And she asked the defendant, "Oh my God, has something already happened with you and this boss?" And the defendant said no. She denied it. So when she lied to her friend, Miss Citron will tell you, when she denied it, I didn't push any further. Another witness you'll hear from, ladies and gentlemen, is a young lady by the name of Christina Oliveira. Now, Miss Oliveira is a waitress, and she's a waitress in a place called the Pulse nightclub. It's in Greenville, South Carolina. And Miss Oliveira will tell you that during this trip to South Carolina, she saw the defendant and Hemi. She saw them at Pulse together. And she'll tell you that she saw the two of them. They were dancing. They were kissing one another on the lips. They were groping each other like they were a couple, romantically involved, out on a date. You'll even see a receipt where Miss Oliveira rang the two of them up, and you'll see on that receipt where she identifies the table as the dinner couple you'll hear from Ms. Citron, and she'll tell you what she saw. You'll also, ladies and gentlemen, see an email that will bring you. And in that email, the defendant references one of the trips that they took together. And she references dinner, and that evening being one of the best she'd ever had. And it's too bad she wouldn't be able to have it again. In that same exchange about dinner and the wonderful evening, she talks about feeling as though she betrayed everyone. She talks about not knowing how she was going to live with herself. She talks about feeling a need to repent for the rest of her life because of what she had done. Now, ladies and gentlemen, I want you to know, because right after that email, you'll hear evidence that it's after this exchange that she sends pictures to him of her children. On again, off again. In, out. Conflict. Within. Another witness you'll hear from, ladies and gentlemen, is Miss Melanie White. Now, Ms. White will come to you and she'll tell you she's a friend of Hemi Newman. In fact, she's a real estate agent who sold him his home. And she'll tell you that she met with Mr. Newman and he was confiding in her. He told her he was having financial problems and he was thinking about a short sale on his house or maybe even a foreclosure. And she'll also tell you, ladies and gentlemen, that he continued to confide in her and he told her about a woman at work that he was interested in. And he shared things with Miss White about this woman and about the relationship that the two of them had. And he told her about the trips that they took together. And Ms. White will come in and she'll testify, ladies and gentlemen, that Hemi even called her. He called her from one of the trips that they took to Greenville together. And in this telephone conversation, Hemi mentioned to Ms. White, well, you know, we just finished dinner. Soon we're going to be going up to our room. What should I do? And she's going to tell you that she told him, Hemi, you need to go to your room alone, lock your door, and stay away from her. And she'll tell you she didn't hear from Hemi anymore that night. The next time she talked to Hemi was when they had left Greenville, and he dropped her off at her home in Dunwoody, and he called Miss White. And he told Miss White about the trip, and he told Miss White that she gave in. She gave in during that trip. And Miss White will tell you that she said, Hemi, you know you shouldn't have done that. She'll also be able to give you other details that will shed light on this relationship. Now, the evidence will show, ladies and gentlemen, that the last trip they took together was in October of 2010. It was another trip to Greenville. And the emails will show that after this trip, she was angry with Hemi again. And the two of them had agreed that they wouldn't communicate about anything except work during this time frame. And during this period, the defendant took a cruise with her husband. She took a cruise with Rusty. And the evidence will show the day after they docked, she had Hemi Newman at her home. And the evidence will show at some point while he was there during this visit, Rusty was home as well. And 2 days later, Rusty was shot dead. That was the morning of November 18th. And the evidence will show, ladies and gentlemen, that morning at 9:25 a.m. she was at work. and she got a phone call from the daycare center. The person who called her told her, Ian's fine, but you need to get here. There's been an accident involving Rusty. And she left work. And the evidence will show, ladies and gentlemen, 2 minutes later, the very first person she called was Hemi Newman. And she's en route to the daycare center to find out what happened to her husband because they didn't tell her. And I want you, ladies and gentlemen, to listen because you'll hear that before she gets to the daycare center, she calls Rusty's father, Don Sneiderman. And Mr. Sneiderman will take the stand, and he'll tell you that Andrea called him. The evidence will show she called him at 9:30, 5 minutes after she got the call from the daycare center. And in this conversation, Mr. Sneiderman will tell you that the defendant said to him, Rusty's been shot. I'm so sorry. Pay close attention, because not only will the witness say it, you'll hear her say it. She said, no one would tell me what happened to Rusty. I didn't know Rusty had been shot until I got to the hospital, which was well over an hour after that phone call. Well over an hour after she told Donald Sneiderman that Rusty had been shot. She says it, he says it. You'll also hear from other witnesses, her friend, her best friend, and a coworker, who'll tell you that she called them as well that morning, before she ever made it to the hospital. And she told them that Rusty had been shot. And ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Sneiderman will take the stand and he'll tell you about that phone call. And he'll tell you that when she told him Rusty had been shot, he didn't believe her. He couldn't fathom that somebody would shoot his son. So he picked up the phone because he didn't have any other information, and he called the daycare center. And he tried to find out what happened. And he'll tell you that when he hung up, they were able to confirm for him that Rusty had been shot. His other son, Steve, was traveling that morning. And Mr. Sneiderman will tell you that after he learned and confirmed that Rusty had been shot, he sent Steve an email saying, Rusty's been shot. He didn't know his condition at that point. So he told his son, Steve, continue on, I'll update you. And the evidence will show, ladies and gentlemen, at about 11 o'clock that morning, after Don Sneiderman spoke to someone at the hospital, he sent Steve a second email saying Rusty's dead. You need to start making your way home. Mr. Sneiderman will tell you he's very clear about what happened that morning. In fact, he'll tell you, ladies and gentlemen, it was the day that he felt that his life stopped. And he'll never forget the events of that morning. You'll always, also, ladies and gentlemen, have an opportunity to hear and see evidence of the defendant when she arrived at the daycare center. And you'll see that she jumps out of her car, she falls into the arms of a police officer. She's devastated. They take her inside of the daycare immediately, place her in an office as a holding area while she waited for her parents. And the evidence will show, ladies and gentlemen, that when she's in that office, in the holding area at the daycare center, before her parents arrive, moments after she's devastated and falling into the arms of a police officer, she calls Hemi Newman again. She doesn't get him. Shortly thereafter, her parents get to the daycare center, and they left and went home to the defendant's house in Dunwoody, which is not far from the daycare center. She went home to change clothes so that she could go to the hospital, where her husband is now being pronounced dead. And while she's at home, so she can go to the, changing clothes so she can go to the hospital, the evidence will show, ladies and gentlemen, she called Hemi Newman one more time. She doesn't get him. That's what the evidence will show. The evidence, ladies and gentlemen, will show she called Hemi several times that morning. Not only did she call him, but she texted him. And the fact that she called Hemi, and the fact that she texted Hemi, she hid from the police. She didn't tell him. The evidence will also show, ladies and gentlemen, not only the fact of the calls and the text messages, but the proof of the calls from her telephone handset had been deleted before she turned it over. She suspected him immediately, but she hid her suspicion, and she hid the evidence that would have told the police about events the morning her husband was shot and killed. And ladies and gentlemen, you will hear that she does not give the police much more information, excuse me, until January of 2011, around the time that Hemi's arrested. And you'll have an opportunity to hear an interview that the police did with her on January 5th. And they share with her that they've made an arrest. They arrested someone for the murder of her husband. And they told her it was her boss, Hemi Newman. And you'll hear her, oh, Hemi, Hemi, Hemi. You'll hear her on the tape. And you'll also hear the police as they kind of confront her and ask her, so what do you think Hemi told us? Oh, well, that he loves me and that he wants to marry me? It's the first time she ever said that. First time she ever told the police that was when they confronted her, and she didn't know what Hemi had said at that point. And ladies and gentlemen, when you hear that interview, I want you to compare it to what she told them the day after the shooting, when she said, well, my boss, but you know, it was a one-time thing. It was nothing. You're barking up the wrong tree. Compare the January statement to that first statement. The other thing I ask you to do, ladies and gentlemen, is when you listen to the statement that she gave in January, you'll hear her tell the police, well, you know, I started to suspect Hemi last week, around the 28th of December. And the evidence will be clear, ladies and gentlemen. Contrast it with what she told her friends long before December 28th, that she suspected Hemi Newman. You'll have an opportunity to hear that evidence. So you'll see, ladies and gentlemen, that she hid evidence and she concealed it and she remained silent. She didn't tell them that she was a willing participant with Hemi Newman in this relationship. And she certainly didn't tell them about all of the activity and involvement and feelings that were involved in that relationship. The evidence will show, ladies and gentlemen, that she was afraid of what telling the truth would mean for her. And not only does she conceal the truth during the investigation, the evidence will show that she continued to conceal the truth and to give testimony that was not true to a jury during the trial of the State versus Hemi Newman. The trial that involved the man who murdered her husband. And you will hear, ladies and gentlemen, that when she testified in that case, she came into this very courtroom. She took this very witness stand, ladies and gentlemen, right here, and she raised her hand. And she swore to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. The evidence in this case will show that is not what she did. She continued to hide evidence, conceal evidence, and tell lies. So, ladies and gentlemen, just like she misled her family and her friends, just like she misled the police, just like she misled that jury, the evidence will be clear that misleading them, concealing information, and lying to them hindered an investigation, hindered the apprehension of a criminal, that criminal being the man that murdered her husband. She gave false information and false statements to the police, and the evidence will show that she lied during judicial proceedings. The evidence in this case will show a forbidden romance that ends in murder. Silence despite her suspicions, and lies to conceal the truth from her family, from her friends, from the police, and from a jury. So we ask, ladies and gentlemen, that you listen closely to the evidence as it's presented in this case. And at the end, when you've heard everything, and you go in the back to deliberate, we ask that you return a verdict that speaks the truth and not a lie. Find the defendant guilty on all charges. Thank you.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, before the defense have an opportunity to outline what they anticipate the evidence to show, I'm going to give you just a short break in the jury room. And I give you these short breaks to not discuss the case, keep an open mind. With the assistance of my deputy, it's going to be a relatively short break to refresh yourselves, stand up and stretch. It's going to be in the neighborhood of 10 minutes. Mr. Deputy, if you would assist. Sir, all right. You may be seated.
I'm Jeff Hullinger along with Paige Pate, our attorney, who is serving as our analyst this morning and for the course of the afternoon as well in the trial of Andrea Sneiderman. The prosecution with her opening statements. Give me some thoughts and views of what you heard. Went about 50 minutes. Anything surprise you in this?
Nothing surprising at all. There's always the risk, though, when a prosecutor gives this kind of a dramatic and involved opening statement that she's over-promising. I mean, the real question here is, will the state be able to prove all of the lies that Ms. Hill referred to in her opening statement?
Over-promising is something that we heard during the George Zimmerman trial, didn't we?
That's right, absolutely. And the jury's going to expect the state to put on the evidence they tell them they're going to put on. You've got to maintain that credibility, because if you don't, then the jury's not going to follow along.
So then what would be the strategy of over-promising if you do not have the evidence to submit to the jury? If you overpromise, don't you shoot yourself in the foot, so to speak?
You do. It's not a good strategy, but some prosecutors just can't help it. They're ambitious. They really want to inflame the jury very early in the trial, and opening statements is a great time to do that. The jury is attentive. They're awake. They're listening to everything that you say. So it's a great opportunity to lay out your story.
Now, I am not an attorney. I am not a judge. I'm not serving on a jury, but I will say this. Much of what I heard during the course of 50 minutes seemed to point toward infidelity, and infidelity is not illegal in the state of Georgia, yes?
That's correct, yeah. The relationship itself is not illegal. She's not indicted for having a relationship with Newman or even lying about having a relationship with Newman. What she's been indicted for and what the state will have to prove is that she made material lies, lies that made a difference in the investigation.
So when we hear the defense come to bat here in a couple of minutes, would you believe that they probably will go after the infidelity issue right away, saying, look, this is not the issue of what this trial is all about?
Probably, but I think they're going to have to concede some things. It sounds fairly clear that Sneiderman lied or at least made some misstatements about certain facts. And what I think the defense has to do in order to maintain that credibility, which is so important, is concede some of those facts, but then say it didn't make a difference to the investigation.
The opening statement, style versus substance, how important is that to a jury?
It's important, but you got to go with your strength. I mean, if your style is overly dramatic, be overly dramatic. If your style is dry and matter of fact, then be that way. Because jury wants credibility, and that's what they look for. So as long as you can maintain that, you're doing well.
This style was pretty matter of fact. I mean, this was not Bobby Lee Cook.
No, it's not. But again, I think she effectively laid out all the elements and at least the facts she's hoping to be able to prove at the end of the day.
Will we see more theatrics from the defense in their opening statement?
I doubt it. These lawyers are all well experienced, all been here in DeKalb County a long time. I expect we're going to see them talk very specifically about details and evidence.
Taking a look at some of the issues here that, the central theme was the forbidden romance and then the lies after that she was not going to leave Rusty, but there was the issue of even talking about marriage, as they will, as you were saying, if they're over-promising, they're talking about emails where that subject was broached as well.
Right, and I understand the reason the state's doing this. Motive is not an element of perjury. It's not an element of these other offenses, but the jury wants to know why. If you're telling us that she lied, why did she lie? And it could be to protect a relationship or at least her knowledge of the relationship.
A key word that we heard during this opening statement, too, I think was concealment. We heard that a couple of times. I think that's a very, very important word during the course of that 50-minute speech.
Absolutely. Concealment is one of the offenses in the indictment, and the state will have to prove beyond a reasonable doubt that Andrea Sneiderman knew about something that was critical to the state's investigation and didn't tell anyone about it.
It is still impossible to fathom the decision not to take a plea bargain if indeed Doug Richards on our 7 o'clock news last week was told by a friend of the Sneiderman family that a 1-year prison sentence was offered, and in all probability the estimation is that she probably wouldn't serve that kind of time in jail anyway. If you're her attorney, do you still look back at that and say, a plea bargain is a much easier route? It would have been a more economical route, and certainly it is a less risky route given the fact that you're looking at 13 felonies here.
Yeah, you're exactly right. Cases involving perjury, false statement, concealment, they rarely go to trial because normally they can be worked out in a plea agreement. This type of an offense or these offenses, you don't normally serve a lot of jail time. But I believe in this case, if she is convicted, Judge Adams will feel that he needs to give her more than the plea offer of the 1 year. So I expect she will serve some time.
Give us a little view of Judge Adams in these kinds of things. We saw him last week during the jury, and you sort of got the idea the courtroom was his domain. He was a very strong figure there about his expectation and what he's going to tolerate and what he wants to see in terms of word and action. How different will it be during the trial from what we saw during the jury selection?
I don't think different at all. I've tried a murder case in front of Judge Adams. He makes sure that both sides stick to the rule book. He's going to enforce the rules of evidence. He will keep this trial moving. He will make his decisions very quickly. At least that's what he's done in the past, and I expect he'll continue to do so. One
of the early comments that we heard before this really got going was the fact that family members can be in for the opening statements, but they cannot be present when evidence is being submitted. Would you explain why that is?
Sure. In Georgia, as in most other states, we have the rule of sequestration, which basically means one witness can't hear what another witness has said because it may affect their testimony. There's some exceptions to that. I mean, I think we saw in the Zimmerman trial that in Florida, they allow family members to sit in even if they're going to be witnesses.
That's a bad idea, isn't it?
That's certainly an argument against it because you're going to hear what the other folks are going to say. You're going to be able to anticipate questions. And the real concern is you may be able to tweak your testimony to be consistent with the other witnesses.
Everybody is easily influenced, it would seem, in these kinds of matters. If you are a member of the jury, if you are part of those who are going to testify, it would seemingly be easy to sort of infect the others with whatever view you have of the circumstances.
Absolutely, and what's also important to note is that sequestration doesn't just apply to the courtroom. These witnesses can't leave after they finish testifying and talk to another potential witness in the hallway, at lunch. They have to maintain their silence.
We've talked about this being a 3-week trial, 3 weeks from today. Do you believe this is really going to go that long? I've heard some attorneys that have told me that if there are murder charges, then the expectation is 3 weeks. If you're talking about lying, you're talking about obstruction of justice, you're talking about perjury, 2 weeks, week and a half.
3 weeks is a stretch. I mean, if you're talking a murder case, you've got all this forensic evidence that needs to come in, medical testimony. You don't have that in a perjury false statement case. I would be surprised if it takes 2 weeks, honestly.
All right, let's get a sense of how it's going to sort of play out the rest of the day. We heard 50 minutes from the prosecution. We've taken a short break here. Now we're going to hear from the defense. Is there a time constraint, a time limit as to how long they can go on an opening statement?
Generally, judges want to limit lawyers to 1 hour per side in openings. Smart lawyers won't take an hour because the jury's not going to be listening for a full hour usually. You want to be very succinct. You want to be matter of fact. You want to lay out your case and tell a compelling story, but don't put them to sleep. So maybe a half an hour for the defense side, and then we'll go right into the evidence.
All right, so let's figure if we get rolling here about, I don't know, 10:20, something like that. Toward 11 o'clock is when they are done. Do you take a break then if you are the judge? Is that your lunch break that then comes in before evidence begins to be submitted?
Not necessarily. As long as they've had their mid-morning break, and they're having that right now, most judges want to go ahead and get started with the evidence. You know, let's set a pace. Let's show the jury that we're going to move things along. So in most cases, I usually see that first witness right after the defense opening.
How do you feel about the issue of not sequestering the jury? Is that a good idea?
I think it's okay. I mean, there's going to be obviously publicity about this case. We're doing this right now.
Right.
But ultimately, with good instructions, if you tell the jury not to focus on these matters and the parties do their job and they don't try to influence the jurors, then they should be okay.
Taking a look at Andrea Sneiderman, how different she looks, not only physically, but her demeanor in the courtroom, significantly different than the Emmy Newman trial.
Right, and there'll be some coaching involved in that. I mean, you'll always want your client to be presentable, and in a murder case, of course this is no longer a murder case, but any serious criminal case, you'll want them to look non-threatening, and I think that's been a real challenge for her so far.
A sort of preppy look going on today, a sort of Talbot's look, if you will.
Sure, not somebody that would lie about a murder.
Okay. All right, we are getting ready for Judge Gregory A. Adams to come back into the court. We are getting ready to hear from the defense. And a reminder that we will have coverage for you coming this afternoon on our newscast on 11 Alive at 6. Then at 7 o'clock with Judge Glenda Hatchett. We'll be with Brenda Wood, and I will be here with Paige Pate. And that's our coverage today. So let's go back into the courtroom right now and Judge Adams.
You may be seated. All right, Kelly, we're back on the record. Ladies and gentlemen, at this point in time, the defense will have an opportunity to give an opening statement. Although the defendant does not have to present any evidence whatsoever, the state has a burden of proving each and every material element beyond a reasonable doubt. Mr. Clegg, you may proceed.
Interesting situation you folks find yourselves in here today. Packed courtroom, TV camera, 8 lawyers, 4 on each side, jury questionnaires, individual jury questioning, a week-long jury selection process for a hindering the apprehension of a criminal, concealing facts in a political subdivision, false statement, perjury case. Obviously, there's something going on here, and Ms. Hill alluded to it. It was alluded to in the jury questionnaires last week, and it is contained in the indictment. And that there is a dead body that is tangential to this case. Rusty Sneiderman, make no mistake, was gunned down in cold blood about 9:10 in the morning on November the 18th, 2010, right after he had dropped his 2-year-old son Ian off at the Dunwoody Prep Daycare Center. Okay. Rusty Sneiderman was married to Mrs. Andrea Sneiderman, the defendant on trial in this particular case. There's no question whatsoever that he was gunned down. And there will be, quite frankly, no question that the individual who gunned him down was a gentleman by the name of Hemi Newman. Hemi Newman was Andrea Sneiderman's boss at General Electric. She had worked for him for approximately 7 months at the time that he gunned her down. There will be no real issue that he was wearing a fake beard when he did it. There will be no real issue that he was driving a rental van that he had rented the day before when he did it. There will be no real issue that he had taken the license plate off that particular van, and there will be no real issue that he had purchased the gun with which he committed this particular crime about 2.5 weeks earlier from a gentleman by the name of Jan De Silva, who was a parking lot attendant at the Atlanta Fish Market. There will be no real issue that Hemi Newman went to trial in this courtroom, as Ms. Hill said, back in 2002. There will be no real issue that at that trial, the issue was not whether or not Hemi Newman committed the crime. That issue was conceded in opening statement by his attorneys, but the issue at that trial was, and there's no real question about this, the issue was Hemi Newman criminally responsible for his actions at the time that he committed the act? He asserted an insanity defense when he went to trial. And in regards to the murder, there will be no real question that on November 19th, some 36 hours after her husband had been gunned down in cold blood, after the father of her 5-year-old daughter and her 2-year-old son had been gunned down in cold blood not far from their home, Andrea Sneiderman talked to the police. You will hear, ladies and gentlemen, that interview. It will not have to be summarized for you. It will not have to be described for you. You'll get to actually hear the interview yourself. And during the course of that interview, it is Andrea Sneiderman, the woman who sits here today, who is on trial for somehow impeding the investigation of the Dunwoody Police Department and presumably the DeKalb County District Attorney's Office. It was Andrea Sneiderman who first inserted the name of Hemi Newman into the investigation. And the answer, quite frankly, the statement she made will not be as Ms. Hill describes it. Quite frankly, she was asked a specific question, is there anyone who is trying to break up your family? And she immediately said, yes, my boss. There will be no equivocation, there will be no hesitation whatsoever. They then said, what's your boss's name? She said Hemi. What's your boss's last name? She said Newman. And then there is a brief discussion that follows. It is not the discussion as Ms. Hill would have you believe. At no point does she ever say that was a one-time thing and then that ended. Absolutely not. So keep this in mind during the course of this entire trial. Again, on November 19th, 36 hours after her husband has been gunned down in cold blood, Andrea Sneiderman gives the police the name of the guy who ultimately did it, and quite frankly, gives them the motive. Does she know at that time that Hemi Newman committed the crime? No, she does not. And quite frankly, there will be no evidence presented to you whatsoever to indicate that fact. But she is the one who first interjected his name and basically gave the police at least an idea as to somebody they could look at. Again, she didn't know, and based on the guy's personality and based on everything about him, she had no reason to believe that Hemi Newman would have committed this crime, but nonetheless, she did absolutely nothing whatsoever to impede the investigation of this case. She ain't on trial for murder, folks. Let's make sure we all understand that. You have heard the indictment read. She is not accused of actually having been present when the murder was committed. There will be no question whatsoever that Hemi Newman was alone when he committed this heinous act. There is no evidence whatsoever to show that she suggested that Hemi Newman do this, that she encouraged him, that she was aware of the fact that he had purchased the gun, that she was aware of the fact that he had purchased a fake beer, that she was aware of the fact that he had driven a van, a rental van, on the day of the crime. Quite frankly, the evidence is going to show, and I think Ms. Hill made reference to it in opening, that at some point that morning she was trying to reach Hemi Newman. There will be no evidence to show that Hemi Newman, that she knew, that Hemi Newman had tried to set up an alibi by leaving his phone back at his office at GE. She's trying to reach him. She can't reach him because Hemi Newman has thought ahead. Hemi Newman has decided, I can set up an alibi, I can deflect attention from myself. If they come asking, my cell phone will ping off the towers here near the General Electric building. I will not be a suspect. Instead, this woman is charged with 13 different crimes. You have heard them read. There is one count of hindering the apprehension of a criminal, one count of concealing facts within the political subdivision, yada, 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 4 counts of false statement, and 7 counts of perjury. Interesting thing about those counts, with one exception, in regards to count 1, the hinder and apprehension charge, in a portion of that particular count, there is an allegation that she is supposed to have deleted certain information. Other than that alleged deletion, there is not one allegation in which the state of Georgia will contend to you that Andrea Sneiderman ever committed any sort of physical act in the commission of a crime. This case is different in that regard. If you folks were here to sit on a burglary trial, for example, the allegations would include the physical act of going into a house without someone's permission. A shoplifting, the physical act of going into a store, taking something that didn't belong to you. A sexual assault, physically assaulting another individual. With that one exception, however, in this case, there is no such allegation. One other thing that is very interesting about the allegations, there are, I think, 4 counts of false statement, 7 counts of perjury, 11 actual counts where they allege that she has made a misstatement of the truth intentionally and willfully. Listen to them, folks. During the course of the trial, keep this in mind. How many of them actually deal with a specific event, and how many of them deal with something much more subjective? There is an allegation in this case that she told the police she did not have a romantic relationship with Hemi Newman, that she was not romantically involved, is a perjury count. There is one count, remarkably enough, that makes the allegation that she lied when she said she did not return feelings for Hemi Newman. There's another count that says she lied when she said that she had not told, when she told Hemi Newman, pretty much leave me alone. There is a count that alleges that she kissed Mr. Newman back in October of 2010 at a bar in Greenville, South Carolina. There is a specific count that alleges that she shared a motel room or hotel room with him in Longmont, Colorado. And there is a statement that alleges that she denied that she had been in Longmont, Colorado with the police. Other than those 3 counts, everything else is subjective. Now let's go back to the first count, the hindering the apprehension of a criminal, because there are essentially 2 theories that the state is seeking to advance before you. One, as a result of what she did or did not do, somehow or another, the state of Georgia was hindered in their actual investigation in the case of Hemi Newman. In that particular count, the state of Georgia will contend that somehow she deleted certain particular phone information on that day, November 18th, which was relevant and germane to the murder of Rusty Sneiderman. Wait to hear that evidence. You ain't going to hear it, okay? You're not going to come close to hearing that. You will not hear who it is that deleted the information. You will not know how the information was deleted. You will have no idea when the information was deleted. You will have no idea what specifically the information is supposed to have pertained or related to. There will be so many particular gaps in that particular charge that it will be breathtaking. And what is interesting is that the state of Georgia will ask you to rely on a hunch, ask you to make a guess, ask you to make an inference to conclude that she must have been guilty. That will be, ladies and gentlemen, a consistent theme throughout the course of this case. We expect that the state of Georgia is going to ask you to draw an inference or a conclusion that she had a romantic relationship with Hemi Newman. You have heard in the state's opening statement what they expect to show in support of that. Apparently they are going to show a waitress from a bar in South Carolina who is going to say they danced and gosh, they kissed on the dance floor, and they're going to call a woman by the name of Melanie White who will relate what Hemi Newman told her. Is there going to be anything else to show she had a romantic relationship with Rusty Sneiderman, with Hemi Newman? And the answer is quite frankly no. They will suggest that you can interpret evidence in a particular way, and that when you do so, you can arrive at the conclusion that she must have been untruthful. But throughout this trial, everything you are going to hear is going to be based on inference, quite frankly, speculation, quite frankly, a hunch. There is going to be nothing in this case that will satisfy your minds beyond a reasonable doubt that this woman has done anything to impede this investigation, has ever been dishonest with either the police or the district attorney or the court system, or has done, quite frankly, anything wrong at all. It is a myth. One other thing. 13 counts in the indictment. Every one of them, every single one of them, is alleged to have happened while she was cooperating with either the police or the district attorney's office. Keep that in mind. Every single count is alleged to have occurred while she was actually cooperating with the law enforcement authorities. Now, let's talk a little bit. Obviously, one of you heard Ms. Hill's opening, and one of the things they are going to try to suggest is that Andrea Sneiderman goes to work for GE, she meets Hemi Newman, she's having trouble at home, and she all of a sudden decides, yeah, I'm tired of my husband, I'm going to get into a relationship with this guy, but then somehow or another, she blows hot, she blows cold. What's Hemi Newman to do? Let's start back when she met her husband, Rusty Sneiderman. Because make no mistake, folks, no matter what the state of Georgia will try to contend in this case, Rusty Sneiderman was the love of this woman's life. She met him when she was at Indiana University in Bloomington, Indiana. She was, I believe, a year behind him in college. They were both Jewish. They met at, I believe, the Hillel House. At that point, they struck up a relationship with one another. They started dating. They were on, off again for a while, but they became an item, and they were an item from literally her first year in college until the day that her husband was gunned down in that Dunwoody parking lot. They were inseparable. They were an item through college. Rusty graduated. Andrea graduated shortly thereafter. The couple moved to Chicago. They worked for a large consulting firm. They had not married just yet. At some point on December 30th, of the year 2000, they actually got married down in West Palm Beach at a synagogue that had been founded by the grandparents of both of them. Shortly thereafter, Rusty went to Harvard Business School. Andrea moved with him from Chicago to Boston. She got a job first with a small startup firm. That firm did not make it. Shortly thereafter, she went to work for Harvard Business School Publishing. She is very adept with computers, computer information technology. She might not like me saying this, but she's a computer geek. She knows her way around advanced technology. Okay. They moved to Atlanta. At some point, Rusty works a series of jobs. Andrea continues to do contract work for Harvard Business School Publishing. They have 2 kids. One of them is named Sophia. She is born in 2005. The other is named Ian. He is born in 2008. It was Ian who Rusty had dropped off at Dunwoody Prep on the morning in question. They are living in Dunwoody. They actually at some point get enough funds to go ahead and buy a house out at Lake Oconee. They are enjoying their life. Rusty in early 2010 is working for a company called Discovery Point. There will be no question whatsoever that Rusty really doesn't like working for Discovery Point. Rusty, the evidence will show, is a take charge kind of energetic individual. He is not someone who really needs to be working for someone else. He needs to be in charge of things, and he needs to have his own business. That fact apparently does not rub well with the people who run Discovery Point, and shortly into the year 2010, probably March or April, they part their ways. Rusty goes one way, Discovery Point goes the other. He is out of a job. He and his wife, Andrea, realize he's not meant to work for someone else. He needs his own business. Andrea knows that he is an entrepreneur and is, quite frankly, going to support him unconditionally in his desire to have his own business. We expect the evidence will show that in November of 2010, when Rusty is shot and killed, He is actively involved in trying to start up his own business, something called Star Voicemail. We don't need to go into a great deal of detail as to what that is, but he actually had a luncheon meeting with a potential investor later that day. Somewhere in the neighborhood of 11:15, 11:30, he was supposed to get together with his business partner and another individual. Andrea had been helping him all along. She was completely and totally supportive of what he was trying to do. One way that Andrea was supportive of what he was trying to do was not to make him go back into the corporate arena and find a job working for someone else. Here's the deal. Andrea tells Rusty, you start your business. You're going to succeed. You're going to do what we want you to do. I will go back to work because, quite frankly, her work with Harvard Business Publishing was winding down at that time. I will go back to work. I'll see if I can find a job in the corporate world myself. At that time, in February of 2010, expecting that Rusty's job future at Discovery Point is coming to an end, she goes ahead and sends out some resumes, one of whom goes out to a woman by the name of Relly Newman. Relly Newman is a member of a book club of an individual, and another member of the book club has a connection to Andrea. Okay. The resume gets to Relly Newman. Relly Newman is not employed at the time. Relly Newman gives the resume to her husband, Hemi Newman, and ultimately Andrea winds up working for General Electric. She starts sometime in April of 2010. It is, quite frankly, a stressful beginning. She is a computer geek. Most of the people she's working with are engineers. She needs a lot of help, and she needs it frequently. There will be no question that there was significant contact by either phone, email, or text between she and Hemi Newman. One of the things that you will have to understand in this case is while Newman was in fact her mentor, Miss Hill was correct in that regard, Newman's building was here, Andrea's building was here. She couldn't simply walk down the hall. If she wanted to talk to him, she either had to go from one building to another or communicate electronically. That's what she did. You will hear numbers bandied about during the course of this trial as to the extent of the communication between the two of them. Most of that communication had to do with matters related specifically to her job. Now, did she travel? Sure she did. She went to a number of locations. She went to Melbourne, Florida. She went to Norfolk, Virginia. She went to Minden, Nevada, which I believe is just outside of Reno. She went to Longmont, Colorado. She went to Greenville, South Carolina. She went to London, England, and Scotland, and then she went back to Greenville. Newman came on those trips. Understand this. Andrea was required as a condition of her employment to go to these various locations because what she was trying to do needed input from General Electric employees at those locations. Newman had had a performance evaluation earlier in 2010 and had been told by his supervisors, get out of the office more. People don't know who you are. Get out, mingle with the people you actually come into contact with. He did. Now, at some point, did Hemi Newman develop an infatuation with the woman who sits here in this courtroom here today? Boy, did he ever. We are not going to deny that or contend otherwise. But what the state will describe as a romantic relationship, a romantic involvement, is quite frankly nothing of the sort. What it is a guy who is moonstruck, who is like a teenager in love, and who is head over and heels in love with this woman who finds herself in the darndest predicament. I want my husband to have a business. I want to support the family in the interim while he gets that business up and running. I don't want to jeopardize my future at GE. And quite frankly, she liked working at GE. It was good work. There were intelligent people. She actually liked Hemi Newman. Despite the advances the man made, he was not assertive, he was not aggressive, he was not mean-spirited. There was nothing about him that would have caused her any concern as to her personal safety. She could simply say, Hemi, get a grip, it ain't gonna happen. And he would tuck his little tail between his legs and go about his business. But he was persistent and he kept coming back. There will be no doubt. There will be, as the state has alluded to, a series of emails that you will hear in this case. You will look for evidence of affection from one party to the other. There is going to be evidence that Hemi Newman basically told this woman that he was in love with her, that at some point he wanted to marry her, that he was thinking of her constantly, that he was doing this, that he was doing that. Look for the evidence in those emails, in the reciprocated, in the return emails, where Andrea Sneiderman displays any sort of affection for Hemi Newman. You ain't going to hear it, folks. It is a one-way street. She is trying to handle the situation as best she can without jeopardizing her job at GE. She has been there for a short period of time. She actually talked to a friend or two and said, what do I do? Got some advice. Just handle it as best you can. Don't go to human resources. Bottom line is, she's trying to handle a difficult situation. Now, again, Newman is not a threat. Let's understand the Hemi Newman that Andrea Sneiderman perceived back in the summer and early fall of 2010. He was 47 years old. He was married and had 3 kids. He was an upper mid-level manager